Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating piece of sociological history. We're looking at what actually makes a family. Now, we all have an intuitive sense of what the word family means to us personally, but when we zoom out and look across different cultures, time periods, and modern societal shifts, well, that definition gets stretched, challenged, and honestly, completely rewritten.
So what are we really looking at here? We're exploring a fundamental question. Is the family a universal concept? Is there a single rigid definition of family that applies across every human society throughout history, or is the truth much more complex? To answer this, we're going to unpack some truly groundbreaking sociological research that spans all the way from the 1700s in southern India to modern demographic data in the UK.
Section 1. The Universal Family Theory.
To understand how our definition of family is changing today, we actually have to go back to a foundational baseline set in the mid-20th century. In a highly influential 1949 study called Social Structure, sociologist Peter Murdock made a pretty bold claim. After looking at a massive sample of 250 diverse societies, ranging from small hunter-gatherer bands all the way to large-scale industrial societies, Murdock concluded that the family is in fact a universal social institution. He specifically argued that the nuclear family was present everywhere, either as the sole prevailing form or as the basic building block for more complex extended families.
But Murdock didn't just casually say families exist everywhere. He gave us a strict checklist. He argued a true family absolutely must be a social group characterized by four things: common residence, economic cooperation, reproduction, and the inclusion of adults of both sexes, at least two of whom maintain a socially approved sexual relationship. Now, he knew norms might vary. For example, our source notes the Bonaro of New Guinea, where a parent-child relationship is socially recognized even if it's not biologically direct. But Murdock insisted those four structural criteria were totally universal.
Section 2. The Nayar exception.
But here's the thing about universal rules. If they are truly universal, they shouldn't have exceptions, right? Well, enter Kathleen Gough. In 1959, Gough published a deeply detailed description of the Nayar society of Kerala, down in southern India, specifically focusing on their culture prior to British rule in 1792. The Nayar were a matrilineal society, meaning kinship was traced entirely through female biological relatives. And what Gough found was a society that functioned perfectly without meeting a single one of Murdock's strict criteria. Literally not one. In Nayar society, relationships were uniquely structured. A girl was ritually married to a Tali husband before puberty, but her only real obligation to him was just to mourn at his funeral. That's it. Later on, women could take multiple visiting husbands, known as Sanbanham husbands. These guys were often professional mercenary warriors who were away on duty.
And this custom was incredibly specific. With the woman's agreement, a visiting husband would show up at her home after supper. He would leave his weapons out on the veranda, essentially acting as a giant do not disturb sign for any other Sanbanham husbands, and he had to leave before breakfast the next morning. Crucially, these relationships were not lifelong, and those visiting husbands provided absolutely zero economic support. The actual economic unit was made up of brothers, sisters, and the sisters' children. So Murdock's requirement for a cohabiting, economically cooperating adult male and female, it just did not exist here at all.
Section 3. Rise of Matrifocal Families.
So that begs the question. If husbands aren't forming an economic unit or living in the home, how is the family sustained? Well, this brings us to matrifocal families. These are highly organized, female-headed households containing dependent children without a resident adult male. Both historically and today, we see a significant proportion of these families in the West Indies, parts of Central America like Guyana, and right here in the USA. This structure directly challenges Murdock's insistence that a minimal family unit has to contain adults of both sexes.
And this brilliantly illustrates an argument made by sociologist Yanina Sheeran back in 1993. She suggests that we really need to redefine our baseline. Sheeran posits that the female carer core, and not Murdock's nuclear structure, is the actual true basic family unit. She argues that this female carer unit is the ubiquitous foundation of single-mother families, two-parent families, and extended families alike across all sorts of different societies.
Now, some traditionalists might argue that matrifocal families are just broken nuclear families, but research by N.L. Gonzalez from 1970 suggests otherwise. Gonzalez argues that by relying on strong extended kin networks for economic and emotional support, rather than tying themselves to one husband who just might not provide financial stability, these female-headed groups actually represent a positive, well-organized adaptation to the circumstances of poverty. They are a fully valid family structure in their own right.
Section 4. Same-sex households.
Of course, the definition of family isn't just challenged by historical societies, it is actively being redefined today. Modern same-sex households provide a direct contradiction to Murdock's adults of both sexes requirement. Gay and lesbian households successfully raise children without fitting that old 1949 mold. Children in these families might come from a previous heterosexual relationship through adoption or through new reproductive technologies involving sperm donation or surrogate motherhood.
And we're definitely not just talking about a small handful of exceptions here. Looking at the data, the scale of these families is highly significant. For instance, between December 2005, which is when civil partnerships were introduced in the UK, and the end of 2010, nearly 43,000 civil partners were registered. And official statistics from 2010 noted that about 7% of those civil partners were actively looking after children.
So a crucial point here is stability. Some critics historically tried to argue these weren't proper families, but the data shows that civil partnerships actually had a lower dissolution rate than traditional heterosexual marriages during that exact same time frame. Get this, by the end of 2010, only 1.7% of civil partnerships formed in 2006 had dissolved. Compare that to a 2.7% divorce rate for traditional marriages in that same window. This growing recognition fundamentally altered the legal landscape. In 2012, the UK coalition government proposed the introduction of gay marriage. As our source material points out, while these legislative shifts were supported by groups like the Quakers, liberal Jewish groups, and some Christian denominations, they were simultaneously opposed by the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church. Regardless of the varying institutional stances, the sociological reality of these committed households was absolutely undeniable.
Section 5. Redefining the modern family.
So, balancing these historical exceptions with modern data, how do we actually go about redefining this institution? I mean, if Murdock's 1949 checklist doesn't work for the Nayar of India, or matrifocal households, or modern same-sex couples, what does make a family? Well, sociologist Sydney Callahan offered a really compelling new framework in 1997. She suggested that any household displaying permanent shared commitments to intergenerational nurturing possesses the exact same kinship bonding we observe and name as a family. It's not about strict checklists, it's about intimate communities of mutual support.
Which brings us right back to you. Knowing that the rigid, supposedly universal rules of the past have been thoroughly challenged by both history and modern society, how do you define the true boundaries of your own family today? Is it based on residence, bloodlines, or is it simply those who provide you with an intimate community of mutual support? Something to think about the next time someone tries to tell you there's only one way to build a family. Thanks so much for joining me.